In feudal Japan, the samurai were the elite warriors of the land. They lived by a strict code of honor and duty known as Bushido, and were respected and feared by all. But what happened when a samurai lost their master, their clan, and their purpose? They became a ronin. Ronin were a samurai without a lord or a master, and wandering the countryside in search of their next purpose. They were both revered and reviled as their loyalty and skill were unquestioned, but their lack of affiliation made them a threat to the established order. A ronin defies societal norms in search of something better. I myself have spent many years wandering the land, so to speak, looking for my purpose, searching for what makes me whole. My name is Adam Ronin. Welcome to the Katana Cut, where through creative narrative and my audio and visual prowess, I will be discussing with you everything that makes my heart beat. This show serves to educate and entertain through the topics of music, film, literature, collaboration, nostalgia, nerd culture, and more, and I shall bring you on my unique journey from Ronin to Shogun and everything in between. But before we get to all that, we have to start somewhere. Picture this. It's 1988. You're 5 years old, and nothing in life can get better than the introduction of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, G.I. Joe, and the fading relevancy of He-Man and your Nintendo. Adventures with Mario and Link propel your mind to new heights of imagination. Your parents also own a video store called Spotlight Video, and within those walls you fall deeply in love with film and horror. Vampires, werewolves, Jason Voorhees, Michael Myers, Freddy Krueger, they all become household names to you. Remember, back in the 80s, parents were much more forgiving, so that didn't really matter what you watched. I truly came alive as a child, being shaped and molded unknowingly by the things around me. I firmly believe that my destinies manifested themselves before me in those early days, setting me on my path to being a musician, a creative powerhouse, and finally, as I close other creative chapters and open new ones, to be an author. It all lives within me and has ever since my very beginning and within those walls of that video store. But finding those paths, of course, was never easy, and it never has been and never will be for anybody. I have experienced loss, turmoil, battled with debilitating depression, and so much more. Those downfalls, however, never define us, do they? At least we do our best not to let them. Anybody that knows me knows that the 80s are absolutely important to me in a fundamental way. A lot of people have a lot of nostalgia for different things, especially when they were young and youthful. And I take that love for nostalgia to a transformative level in a lot of ways. And the 80s were formative years for me. I was born in 1982, currently 40 years old. Old as absolute shit. But the things that meant the most to me were movies, video games, comic books, and music. And those things, starting from that young age, basically formed me and molded me to the man that I am today, to get into where I started with music, and all the amazing things I did with music. And those of you who listen to this podcast in its original iteration in 2021, recall that I started the show out by giving you the history of my music and stuff like that. And I will, now that I've kind of scrapped those and am redoing the show in the way that it is now, I will get to all those stories again in more detail in different ways, piece by piece, as we go here. But I have a lot of memories of my parents in the late 80s opened a video rental store called Spotlight Video. Spotlight was, I guess, kind of like this interesting hub for my soul that existed in a sense to where I was surrounded by everything that I loved. I was introduced to the Nintendo Entertainment System. I was introduced to horror movies, which all of these things trajected me into who I am now. My love of video games got me started with Ronin 24. I wanted to create that YouTube channel with my best friends to do video game related content. Horror movies that I would rent at the time shaped me into the lover of cinema that I am today, and propelled me into my journey into literature and writing my own book, which is going to be the biggest part of my next couple of years, is sharing the creative stage with music, but also literature in this book series that I'm creating that will be coming out. I have so many vivid memories of my parents' video store. It had blue walls. The walls were blue. I remember that, and a gray carpet. And just, I was small at the time, so it seemed like as far as you could see was just walls of videos and tapes. And I remember, though I remember the layout, and I remember they had in the office, my parents' office, they had this desk. And actually, I still had the desk that they had from that video store to this day, until I got rid of it in September of last year. So I had that desk remained in my family for years. Still had the stickers and shit on it. It was incredible. In the office, they had this cardboard cutout of Pinhead, which always kind of frightened me, but also intrigued me at the same time. Like, what is this monster? I need to know more about it. Of course, when my parents bought the video store, they bought it from a guy named John, I recall. And part of the deal when they were purchasing it was John was like, well, tell you what, why don't you let your kid, me, take home this, the Nintendo Entertainment System in this box of games and, play with it for a while. So my introduction to Nintendo was because of this thing. And the guy that previously owned the video store let me take home this Nintendo in this huge cardboard box of games. And it was just like heaven. And I got to keep that Nintendo, and that was my first NES. So just so many incredible things culminated from this video store that shaped me into the things I love. Music, horror movies. I remember this one time my dad had, because there was in the corner of the video store, there was a big box TV and movies would play all day long. Just people would think, what's that? And they can rent it, shit like that. And one day my dad had The Gate playing. The Gate is an old 80s horror movie about these kids that open the gate to hell. I loved the movie. It was fantastic. But for some reason, my dad had the movie playing on loop all day long. And, there were some violent parts in it and stuff. And I remember this lady and her daughter getting so offended at the violence on screen. And I remember specifically this girl's mom yelling at my dad, like, how can you have this kind of thing playing for families to see, blah, 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 blah. It was hilarious. That's the dichotomy of customers, is you had this girl and her mother who were screaming and yelling, but there was another girl and her mother that were the complete opposite of Karens, if you will, and I would love to tell you about them. One of the things I remember most from my parents' video store was a girl named Penny and her mother. They would come in sometimes every day, rent horror movies, watch them, return them the next day, and then pick up another couple for that night. Rinse and repeat. Penny's mother was wheelchair bound, likely due to an accident earlier in her life. While I don't recall much about her mother, I distinctly remember Penny. She was around 16 or 17 years old, with blonde hair that was always pulled back into a ponytail. She had a bigger build, but an even bigger and brighter personality. Growing up, my parents were heavily involved with managing their store, which meant that I spent a lot of time there as a child. It was there that I met Penny and her mother, and over time, I grew very, very fond of them. Penny was a particularly bright and energetic person who always seemed to be full of life. It was beautiful. Despite the fact that our interactions took place over 35 years ago, I could still vividly recall the memories of our conversations and different interactions we had. She had an incredible gift for spouting wisdom and offering advice that really resonated with me as a child. Looking back, I can see that Penny played a significant role in shaping the person that I am today. And I'm incredibly grateful for the influence that she had on my life, that she probably has zero knowledge of to this day. She probably does not even remember tiny little Adam Ronan in the video store that she used to go to when she was a teenager. But Penny's influence on my life goes beyond simply introducing me to horror films. She taught me to appreciate the deeper messages and the themes that they often contained. Through her guidance, I was able to see that horror films, while often dismissed as violent and senseless, could actually be a source for meaningful lessons and insight. Two films that Penny introduced me to were The Lost Boys and Fright Night. While on the surface, they may seem like your typical 80s horror flicks, Penny encouraged me to look deeper and focus on the underlying messages. Through Lost Boys, Penny taught me the importance of family and brotherhood. It wasn't just about the rock star vampires and the worm noodles. It was about how the characters navigated their relationships and how they relied on each other to survive. Then, of course, there was Fright Night, which is my all-time favorite horror movie. Penny showed me that it was more than just a story about a vampire terrorizing a neighborhood. It was a story about love and the power that it holds to conquer all. She encouraged me to look past Jerry Dandridge's charm and ferocity to see the deeper meaning behind his actions. Looking back, I realize how much Penny's teachings have kind of shaped who I am today. Through her wisdom and her guidance, though young, she taught me to appreciate hidden messages in films and to always look beyond the surface. Her influence has been a constant source of inspiration, and I will forever be grateful for the impact that she has had on my life all those many, many years ago, and the things that I took from those interactions that I still apply to how I view creative works to this day. Not to mention, she introduced me to Mega Man and told me the correct order to beat all the bosses, and without that tip, I would have never accomplished such a thing. Penny was just a cool teenage girl whose best friend was her mother, and they lived a simple life of horror movies and Nintendo games. And really, that kind of mirrored my own life. Horror movies and Nintendo games shaped me as a young man, but so did the relationship with my own mother, who was and continued to be my best friend until she passed away last year. Perhaps seeing Penny's interactions with her own mother encouraged me and set me on a path unbeknownst to myself to cultivating that own relationship with my mom, and I will forever be grateful for that. It's 2023 now, and I have no idea whatever happened to Penny and her mother. In 1990, Blockbuster Video moved in across the street in the opposing shopping center across from where my parents were with their store, and it effectively put Spotlight Video out of business relatively quickly, and it was a real sad moment in my family's history when they lost that business. Countless memories were in that store that closed down. But when those doors closed, Penny was also lost to time. I'm sure she went on to do amazing things, and I'm sure that she cultivated further that relationship with her mother. Her memory and her kindness and her guidance never left me, not once. It's so weird how I can go back in my mind to the 80s and, think about all those things, but and all the people that I interacted with, they're all still so fresh in my mind, especially Penny and her mom. I can distinctly remember every detail about her face, about some of the clothes she wore, and this was 35 years ago. It was really quite something. Quite something indeed. And I just will always kind of ponder what might have happened to Penny. I hope that she is living well. She had no idea the kind of impact she had on a child. And so I would imagine she's probably, assuming she's still alive, in her, very, very early 50s, mid 50s maybe, I don't know. Really interesting. Now, one thing I want to do with this podcast is, of course, I'm going to be telling you stories, and if you're listening to the podcast, you'll have a lot of audio treats that go along with it. Or if you're watching the podcast, you'll have a lot of visual storytelling, things like that going along with it on the YouTube. But one thing that was suggested to me by the Sama, who is one of my closest friends, and he's also on the Patreon at the highest tier. He's a VIP producer, so I will touch base with him on content and stuff like that, and he'll kind of help me shape a lot of things that is going to be happening going forward. And he had a great idea for a segment. He's like, I think it'd be really cool if you had a segment where you picked a song and broke it down, the history of writing it and things like that. And like I said, this podcast was going to be about me, life experiences. It's going to be about my music, but also my writing and people that I love and just interesting things. So to go along with my musical history, I think maybe each episode I will pair it with like an audio accoutrement. So this particular episode is called Genesis, Let There Be Neon. That is the name of this debut episode, which is essentially just kind of giving you a flash forward or flash backward look at my formative years in the 80s. So that's where the neon comes in. And then I was like, okay, well, what's a good song that I've written that could be a nice pairing with this, so that I could play for you as well as explain to you the recording process and the story behind it. And I went back to my third full-length album that came out on my birthday in 2020. That album was called The Neon Phoenix. And of the 4 albums that I've done, I think that might be my favorite one. But the song on there, which is the self-titled track to the album, The Neon Phoenix. So the Neon Phoenix was, I can't remember at what point I wrote that song in the writing cycle of the Neon Phoenix album, but I do know that I wrote the lyrics on December 21st of 2019. So that was probably closing in towards the end of the writing cycle of the album. And it's interesting. It's so interesting because the theme of that song is, and that whole album really is coming to term with your mistakes as a person and as a man, and burning away the things that you were and becoming anew to become your best self, and opening your eyes to what's possible for you in the world and your potential. Everybody has this deep-seated potential inside them to do incredible, beautiful things. The problem is not a lot of people ever realize that potential or even recognize it within themselves. And it's been a very interesting last 6 months for me. So my mom passed in August, okay? My mom passed away in August from health complications that she had been struggling with for 5 years prior to that. It absolutely wrecked me. And for a while after my mom passed, I was like, I'm doing okay. I'm handling this pretty well. And then my dad on December 30th, which was the same day as my 4th studio album, Katana, came out. My dad took his own life. He was a man that harbored a lot of self-resentment and perceived failures. And of course, the loss of my mother, I think he didn't quite know what to do with himself. So in a span of 4 months, I lost both of my folks. And I thought it was okay. It's been very hard, very, very hard. But I wake up every day and I'm working on projects, and I'm like, I got to keep moving forward. And I thought, you know what? Grief isn't so bad. I've done a lot of reflecting over the last few days, really, since prior to recording this podcast. And I realized that I am not okay. I have not been okay for 6 months. Not so much in the grieving process of my father, but I am very much a broken person because of the loss of my mother. And I've come to find that that's okay. That is okay. Because in the face of tragedy and in the face of immense trauma, where a lot of people will give up, a lot of people will find that they just quite can't meet the mark for what they need to do. And then I reflect back to my formative years with my parents, the video store, things that I learned from them, things that I learned from Penny, and things that I have learned about myself since the passing of my parents, that I truly am becoming a phoenix. I am letting the things that held me back currently, right now, as we speak even, I am letting things wash away. I'm letting the dead skin and the dead memories and the ashes just kind of disappear. And I am becoming anew. I am facing the renewal and the truth of what I am capable of, what my potential is, and what I know I can do in the face of tragedy. Some of the lyrics in that song, The Neon Phoenix, that opens with "Shame on me. For all the moments I've wasted, it's all behind me." And so, I wrote this song in 2019. This was long before my mom passed. She was just newly sick by a year. But now, looking back on things, shame on me for all the moments I've wasted. Shame on me for not truly giving myself the self-love that I needed as a person in the last 6 months of losing my parents. And shame on me for wasting time. But it's all behind me now. I have nothing but a blank slate ahead of me to paint any picture I want. That picture that I am going to paint is publishing my book series and skyrocketing that to the absolute fucking top. And in conjunction, continue to write music and cultivate a community and achieve my goals and dreams. Right now, my community is very small. It's wavered over the years, based on depression and going MIA for a little while. People have remained. People still listen to my music. I have a small but loyal group of listeners and fans. I'm going to double, triple, quadruple that as we go by here. And if you're listening to this now, you're at the very start of my journey, and through my literature and my stories, and through my audio and my music, and through stories that I'm telling you through this podcast and other art mediums that I want to get into, I will become that phoenix, and I will become what I have always been meant to be. So yeah, so that's why I picked that song to accompany this episode. Very interesting. Some expectations I'd like to set for the show, as the episodes, sometimes they're going to be longer, sometimes they're going to be shorter. I want to just be able to tell you, first of all, how grateful I am for the ability to be able to share my stories. And if there are even just 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or even 10, 20, 30 of you that care to absorb them. And music has been my backbone and my love for creating, and in art, and will always be in my blood. But I'm really excited to stretch my creative wings a bit. Music will always be there, and I will continue to create music, but I am so excited to share stories with you in a different medium. And, I'm working on this book series, and this podcast is going to be about history. I'm going to talk about mental health. I'm going to tell you stories. I'm going to encourage people. I'm going to talk about art and what art can do for people. I'm going to nerd out on pop culture. I'm going to talk about movies and video games, and I'm going to talk about music and books and everything. Stories with a message and an audio and visual flair. And that is what this podcast is going to be. And it'll probably be launching bi-weekly. This is the premiere episode. Still kind of getting my feet wet. Things will kind of change here and there as we go, but I am generally very excited here. I encourage you to follow me on my socials. So you can look me up on Twitter at, on Twitter, I am Adam Ronan. Instagram, adam.ronan. You can look me up at Adam Ronan on TikTok, all kinds of beautiful things. And of course, check me out on Spotify. Oh, and also, if you want early shit, if you want experience and contribute to these episodes, vote on topics, get behind the scenes stuff, get access to episodes early, get access to chapters and stuff like that for the book early, and music, early releases, stuff like that, check out patreon.com/Adam Ronan. That is new and revamped for 2023, and it's going to be a good time. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for listening and or watching, or both. I love you. It's going to be a good year. I will not let grief define me. And neither will you. So, I will talk to you soon, and I'll see you in the next episode. Adios. Adam Ronan out.